when you are on holiday, a fire evacuation plan is something you see on the back of every hotel door, but it's just as important to have one when you're at home.
Absolutely. Some disabled and vulnerable residents living in high-rise flats say plans in place to get people out safely in an emergency might not work for them. Presenter Samantha Renk has been to meet the disabled people fighting for change.
The Grenfell Tower tragedy casts a long shadow. Of the 37 residents classed as disabled or vulnerable, 15 lost their lives that day. For me, and for many disabled people across the country, the bewildering grief we felt has slowly given way to anger and also to fear. 10 years ago, I left my home in rural Lancashire to live my dream and move to London. I found an adapted apartment. It was on the 5th floor of an apartment block. But every night when I went to bed, I did wonder what would happen in an emergency. It's a worry many disabled or vulnerable people have always had to some degree. But after the Grenfell Tower fire and the subsequent cladding crisis, it's got a lot worse.
It's just wrong. And, it's not our fault that we're disabled.
Liz Kimber and Joe Dowd live on the 3rd floor of a block of flats in Brentford, West London. Joe is physically disabled since a bleed on his brain 7 years ago. In 2020, an assessment found that the cladding used on their building poses an unacceptable fire risk. But despite that damning information, there's currently no plan in place to get Joe out in an emergency.
I'm outraged. I mean, if there's a fire in the building tonight, there's no plan to get me out. And I just find that so disheartening. I feel let down, I feel angry.
The directions do state that if you can't walk down the stairway, wait in an unaffected stairway or in a designated refuge. There aren't designated refuges, there's one stairway to get out. But really, to ask somebody that's not able to use the stairs to get out of a building to wait while everybody else is directed that they should get out feels very discriminatory.
I fought to be alive, I fought for my recovery through rehab, and now I feel I'm in a fight to get someone somewhere to agree for an evacuation plan to get me out of a burning building.
Thankfully, someone somewhere is looking into this. Last year, the government launched a consultation about whether some building owners should be responsible for ensuring safe personal emergency evacuation plans, known as PEEPs, for their residents. For Joe, this means an evacuation wheelchair that can go down a set of stairs. It's an expense they're hoping their building management will cover. Of course, we don't sit there and think of the worst case scenario all the time, but it must weigh heavy on both of your shoulders.
Of course, we hope that a fire will never happen, but it very much is, on my mind continuously.
While PEEPs are required in commercial spaces like offices, they're not seen so often in residential buildings. Sarah Rennie is hoping that will change, but in the meantime, she's worked with the building management to develop her own PEEP to escape her 13th floor flat in Birmingham.
When we hear the fire alarm, my PA, so the person who supports me, will go and get my evacuation chair and then bring it into my flat, and I hoist from my wheelchair into the chair and then wheel onto the stairwell, and slowly they will just wheel me down the stairs. So it just means that I can be getting out of the building from the 13th floor. As soon as the fire alarm goes off, I can start moving.
And you campaign for all disabled people, that's correct?
Yes, all disabled people, older people, people that might need that little bit of extra time or support to evacuate on their own. We're asking for a conversation with every person who can't self-evacuate to come up with a workable, realistic plan for them, just to minimise the risk.
The results of the government consultation are expected to be published soon, something Sarah and other people unable to self-evacuate from flats are nervously awaiting. You may believe that evacuation plans has no relevance to you, but it's important to remember that anyone can become disabled at any time. We've got an ageing population, and our needs can change just like that. Paul Jennings, London Fire Brigade's Assistant Commissioner for Fire Safety, has advised on how to prepare your own PEEP wherever you live.
The creation and the requirement for a personal emergency evacuation plan is a collective responsibility. We'd like to see residents identify their needs in a way that they're comfortable and confident enough to do that with the responsible person, so they're looking at their own individual risk assessment. We can help with that in terms of the fire safety offering individual advice to residents in their home, but then combining that with the responsible person that's looking at the building's risk assessment. If you do have any concerns about emergency evacuation plans or home fire safety, the National Fire Chiefs Council website has lots of information, whether you be a resident or a responsible person, or if need be, you can contact your local fire station.
If you go to the cinema or the theatre, there's a plan in place to get everyone out in an emergency. If you work in an office, there will be carefully thought through fire evacuation plans. To me, that all sounds incredibly obvious. So why on earth are we not doing the same for our homes? Clearly, we've got a long way to go.
Of course, that would make sense. Thank you to Samantha for that. Well, since we've made that film, the government has said the consultation has found substantial difficulties in implementing personal emergency evacuation plans, citing cost as one barrier and safety as another. The full details aren't going to be properly published for a few weeks yet, but the disabled people we did speak to say they massively disagree with those concerns, pointing out that these sorts of plans don't always have to cost money, for example, and are worried the latest comments suggest the changes they hope for won't happen. Matt, what do you have on this?
Well, the first part of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, made a recommendation, and that was that the owners of the building, so that's the freeholders of the building, should take that responsibility for personal evacuation plans. The government has told us that there's going to be more detail published on this, but campaigners like Sarah that we saw in the film and Sam, they're are really concerned that when is this going to happen exactly? When are they going to see it, if at all?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if people are concerned, or maybe they don't have the mobility that they once did and they want to feel safe, what can they do?
Well, there's a certain amount that people can do themselves, just using logic and their own understanding to look at a building and say, right, in the event of a fire, how am I getting out? But actually, you don't necessarily have the expertise yourself. And that's where an expert from maybe the fire and rescue service to come in and say, well, okay, I can see an exit route here. The other great resource that councils have, that local authorities have, is they have a private rented sector department. Their job is to come into people's houses when they feel it's not safe and say, okay, there's stuff we could do here. There's stuff your landlord could do here. Sometimes it's a management company that can take responsibility for the whole building. And that's what you need sometimes, is someone to say, I've seen this situation before. That's your safe exit. This is your plan. And that helps you with your own, the kind of judgments that you're making yourself sometimes.
Absolutely, and gives you the peace of mind that you do need to
That's what it's all
live
about.
a fruitful life.
Absolutely, get good brains together and make it work for sure. Thanks, Matt. Cheers.